We've come to know Tom Cruise to be many things over the years. A fighter pilot, a race car driver, and a couch-jumping enthusiast. But not many would instantly jump to Green Man of the Forest in their description of him. Throw in some elves, fairies, and demons, and you got yourself a good time. Or do you? Find out as we attempt to prove to you that 1985's legend is not that bad. Welcome one and all to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies. I'm your host, Jason, and we are in for a fun time tonight. Now, I am going to apologize right off the bat, my dear listeners. I am coming off of a cold, so if I sound like crap, I apologize. If I sounded like crap before, well, that's just me. You'll have to deal with that. But I might be a little out of my league on this one because we have a special guest on this show. Appearing for the first time, Peter Thompson. He is the owner of Movies and Stuff. And Peter, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here. The last bastion of movie rentals in the entire nation's capital. Peter, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Okay, before we get into the movie that we are talking about here, please tell us, how is it having a video rental place in Ottawa in 2023?
It's a myriad of different things. It's very challenging, but it's also extremely rewarding, as you can imagine. And, it's one of those things that you wonder at the time when I took over a few years ago, could I make this work? And the answer is a resounding yes. People still want the material, experience of going to the video store. So I'm just really lucky. And you're right, though. 2023 is probably a challenging time for DVD rental places to be. Sure, yeah.
You would have to think, though, because we see this, myriad of shows and movies that are on streaming services, and then they get pulled from streaming services, and the number of people that are out there is like, oh, I wish I had the DVD. Are you getting a lot of those people who would go to the store and say, you know what, this used to be on Netflix, it's not anymore, I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to watch it, I need to find it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, you have your regular clients, but then you have the clients that come in and say, they just yanked this off whatever platform. And do you have Big Little Lies? Do you have, there's a million. And, luckily we do. We have a good selection. And I think that's key. You have to have a good collection of stock, and you have to make sure that, when they come in to get Big Little Lies, probably a bad example because I think it's HBO and it's not going anywhere, but you have to have the movies that people are looking for.
You say it's HBO and not going anywhere. Batgirl would like to have a word with you on that one.
Oh, yes. True enough. Yeah. Michael Keaton too, eh?
Oh, just no luck for him, I tell you. And I do have to ask though, do you find you get a lot of cinephiles that come in and aside from just, renting movies and buying movies and the like, do you find they just want to talk movies as well?
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Honestly, I love doing that. I could talk movies for hours and hours and hours. So I mean, it depends on the situation, it depends on what we're talking about. But I get a lot of people like that, honestly, and it's quite a joy.
Well, the good thing is you came to the right place because we're going to talk for about an hour on 1985's legend. Now, when we were first talking about you coming onto the show, I said, pick a movie so long as it kind of meets our bad critic score criteria. What is it about Legend that this was the first film that came up to you?
Oh, probably because it was in my heyday, right? I was young, I was impressionable. I think I had just seen Top Gun, and I wanted to see this fairy tale, and it delivered for me personally. The sets were incredible. The makeup on Tim Curry is unreal. It's if you haven't seen the film, see it for Tim Curry alone, in my opinion. And then Mia Sara, luminous. And for me personally, it all came together, and it was quite an experience in the theater as a 10-year-old going, wow, they created this world, and it feels like they created the world for me. And that was one of my first experiences in a theater anyway, seeing this kind of fantastical vision that I never got to experience Star Wars too, which I think in 83, I experienced Return of the Jedi, but I was just too young to see Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. So those would have been but this happened to be the time and place where it blew my mind.
I was really excited when you mentioned this because this was actually a first time watch for me. I'd never seen it before. It's not like I went out of my way to avoid it. It was just a matter of like, it's never actually sought it out. So I was really hyped to watch this and I really, really enjoyed it. Spoiler alert, I enjoyed it. But before we get into the breakdown of Legend, it is time to take this 1985 dark fantasy epic and trailerize it. Enter a world of light and darkness, of magic and adventure, a world where love is grand and everyone is shorter than Tom Cruise. Watch as a pre-Top Gun maverick leaps around the forest as Jack, a man who predefined the clothing choice of pandemic-era men everywhere by wearing ratty shirts that looked like they hadn't been washed in years. And no pants. He's in love with Lily, a princess who wants it all. Touch the forbidden creatures. A man who would go on an underwater scavenger hunt to find a ring just to prove his love. All the pretty shiny things that darkness provides. She's high maintenance in a magical world. Together, they'll face darkness. A horny Tim Curry who just wants more horn. It's Legend. Rated PG for pantless gentlemen. We joke around on the trailerize. We got to tear it down before we build it back up. It should also be noted, and this is going to be a really fascinating discussion point. So Peter's memory of this movie is from the U.S. theatrical release. I watched the director's cut. They are vastly different. This is going to be very, very interesting. But let's talk about who is in this, all right? This film stars Tom Cruise, Mia Sara, Tim Curry, Billy Barty, Alice Playton, David Bennett, Annabelle Lenyon, and Robert Picardo. However, there is an almost starring on this one. And Peter, I'm going to get your opinion on these three names here, because apparently under consideration for the role of Jack were Johnny Depp, Jim Carrey, and Robert Downey Jr. Could you picture any of these guys playing Jack?
Yeah, I remember reading that. Not Robert Downey Jr. and not Jim Carrey. Johnny Depp, yeah, sure, why not? He probably would have been exactly the same as Tom Cruise at that point. Probably better, actually. He was a better actor at the time, if I recall. So that's an interesting one, though. I had forgotten about that, but I remember now that you mentioned it, reading those. Two of those names just don't fit, though. Robert Downey Jr.
It's funny. Robert Downey Jr. is the name that stands out as one I actually wouldn't have minded to see in this. And
I wouldn't mind.
I go back to RDJ's performance in Chaplin. That there was almost not an innocence there, but there's a wistfulness to Chaplin in parts of that movie anyway, especially the early life, where I'm just like, I would love to see that. I would love to see that performance translated to Jack, but I was actually quite surprised with Tom Cruise, but we'll get to that. Also, in the role of Meg Mucklebones, as played by Robert Picardo, it was almost Richard O'Brien, probably best known as Riff Raff from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know what's funny? As Meg Mucklebones, I could actually kind of see it. But
I can see it. I can see anything. I think when you're putting them like that's a heavy makeup creature, right? That's the swamp woman or whatever. I thought it was a woman, to be honest with you, but the swamp creature that comes up and grabs him, that could be anybody. That could be me.
Well, you know what? If they ever do a remake, I will sign up to be Meg Mucklebones quite happily.
Me too. Yeah.
But apparently this is how Ridley Scott settled on Tim Curry for Darkness, because he was studying Richard O'Brien, so he was watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Apologies, English is failing me today. And then saw Tim Curry as Frankenfurter and said, that's got to be Darkness. I don't know how you go from Frankenfurter to Darkness, but I really appreciate it. The film, of course, was directed by Ridley Scott and written by William, I'm going to apologize if I mess up this name, William Hortzberg, who wrote Falling Angel, the novel, then that was turned into a movie. Legend was actually the last screenplay he would ever write. He went on to still write more novels, but last screenplay he would ever write. This film actually garnered a number of award nominations. It was nominated at the 59th Academy Awards for Best Makeup, lost to The Fly. It was also nominated at the 14th Saturn Awards for Best Makeup, lost to The Fly. At the 39th BAFTAs, he was nominated for Best Costume Design, lost to The Cotton Club, Best Makeup and Hair, lost to Amadeus, and Best Special Visual Effects, it lost to Brazil. At the Venice Film Festival, Ridley Scott was nominated for the Golden Lion Award, and at the Young Artist Awards in 1987, David Bennett, the guy who played Gump, was nominated for Exceptional Performance by a Young Actor, Supporting Role, Feature Film, Comedy, Fantasy, or Drama, and the film was nominated for Exceptional Feature Film, Family Entertainment, Fantasy, or Comedy. However, it's not always the bridesmaid. Sometimes it gets to be the bride. It did win at the British Society of Cinematographers for Best Cinematography. Unfortunately, all of that did not necessarily translate at the box office. According to IMDb, this film had a budget of $24.5 million and, according to thenumbers.com, had a domestic gross of only 15.5 with a worldwide gross of $23.5 million. It did hold on to the number one spot domestically when it was released in 1986, not 1985, and was eventually knocked out of the number one spot by JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. But also debuting the week that it came out, April 18th, 1986, at least domestically, was Murphy's Law, that debuted at number 2. And Wise Guys debuted at number 6. So, I mean, that's normally I would say that's respectable. And considering some of the problems that they had, because while they were filming this film, the studio they were filming in burnt to the ground. They lost like pretty much every set and then had to cobble whatever they could to at least finish the film. But do you think that the box office is a massive disappointment considering how epic it did look?
Absolutely. It's not just how it looked. It's, what do you have here? You have Ridley Scott, who is, pretty big by that point. He'd already directed the great Blade Runner. I think, an up-and-comer like Tom Cruise should have done a lot more than that, I think.
Yeah. But also, the critics didn't seem to like this either. Over at Metacritic, this film has a Metascore of 30. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score sits at 73%, which is actually really, really good.
Not bad, eh?
But the critics, a 41% tomatometer. I'm not going to lie, I am surprised that the Metacritic score is that low, down at 30. What is it, though? Like, your opinion, what is it that the critics aren't picking up on with this?
I think this is a film that a lot of critics had a good time hacking to pieces, and maybe rightfully so. The story is, let's be honest here, the story is A to B linear. It's good, versus evil. Something happens, the good has to triumph over evil. It's not a new story by any stretch of the imagination, nor is it Tolkien dialogue or, really, the story is something that you or I could have come up with over the course of a weekend, probably. But I think maybe the common movie critic, and I don't want to pigeonhole people here, but they might be a little jaded, and I think they may look at this as just a grim fairy tale that has nothing behind it. But for me, it certainly did, and I thought almost every element of the picture came together, even though I know they had, as you said, the set burnt down. I think Tom Cruise had been married recently to Mimi Rogers, and is it Mimi Rogers? And I think they were, no, Rebecca De Mornay, maybe. They were about to get divorced, and he was missing her, and he was a lot of stuff going on. But truthfully, I don't know if the critics missed anything, or if maybe this was just too simple a story, and they didn't feel it was executed well enough by Ridley Scott to warrant a good rating.
Well, let's get to the minutia of this, and little by little figure out what it is that is good about this film. We're going to start with Tom Cruise, who of course plays Jack. How was Tom Cruise in this for you?
You could tell he was learning the craft at this point still, but there's a charm about that guy, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with Scientology, and I don't know many people that would agree with that, but in this film, I thought he was quite charming, and he had an exuberance and a charisma that came off very well to the camera. And you could, if you didn't know he was going to be a star before, you knew probably around this time that this is going to be the guy for a while in Hollywood. And not many people could step up in front of the camera like that and deliver a charismatic performance on a script that some would deem average at best, with some lines in there that you probably look back on and cringe. And I thought he did, and I thought he did it quite well.
I'm not going to lie. When you mentioned this film, and I saw it was Tom Cruise, I went in expecting the worst. I did. Like, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest Tom Cruise fan. There are certain roles that I like him in, and that may just be more the movie per se. And of course, this film came out the year before Top Gun was released, but it's also after All the Right Moves and
Risky Business.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I really liked him in this. Like, there was such a, for lack of a better term, it was a great stage performance. It really felt like you could have taken his performance of Jack in this, put it on a stage presentation of Legend in any UK-based theater, and it would have translated well. I was not expecting that out of Tom Cruise. I really wasn't. And I am really pleasantly surprised. Like,
as a matter of fact, was there one performance that wasn't good in this film? Now that I think about it,
that is hard. Because there's a lot to it, right? There's so much that is good to this, like. But I think the thing with Tom Cruise for me, and when he realized too that this came out in 1986, the same year as Top Gun, I wonder if it's one of those things where, I mean, Top Gun was, let's be honest, like that's just a pinnacle of rah macho kind of, pro-American kind of, and then you get this performance, which is very nuanced, very earnest, very innocent, right? It really shows that Tom Cruise is a good actor, very good actor. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to lie, like, this was great. I never thought I'd say that about a Tom Cruise movie, but here we are. This role for him was egoless. It was a surprise to me. I'm really, really impressed with this.
That's probably an interesting point that you make. It's probably at a point where he didn't have a lot of ego and probably transcended into the screen.
Well, I think the thing too is, as actors become almost typecast into the roles that they do, and let's be honest, Tom Cruise almost got into a typecast type situation with a lot of his roles. Because they expect that you hire him because you want Maverick. You hire him because you want whatever his character was in Days of Thunder, right? You want him because of those roles, right? You see that with a lot. Like, you hire Christopher Walken because you want Christopher Walken. You hire Gary Sinise because you want Gary Sinise. This was not your typical Tom Cruise performance. And I love that this is out there. Like, again, like, if you love fantasy films, right? Don't go in there and say, oh, it's Tom Cruise and fantasy. No, it's Tom Cruise, and it's damn good.
Exactly. That was my point from the word go with this film, is what exactly were people expecting when they chastised it? This is a little grim fairy tale. It's very well done.
This film, of course, also marks the cinematic debut of Mia Sara as Lily. I say cinematic debut because she had previously appeared in one episode of All My Children. But this is her big screen debut. How was Mia Sara for you?
She was all right. I remember at the beginning thinking that she was quite stiff, but when she is allowed to sort of show off her dark side in a few of the scenes, you can start to see that she's going to be a force to be reckoned with, and she'd have to share the screen later on with, Matthew Broderick in one of the biggest films of that era, and she did it well. And the more this movie progressed, and I remember thinking this, the more she seemed to completely sort of explore that role, and it became something that you can't imagine somebody else playing. And I think that's the ultimate compliment for an actor or actress. I can't see anybody else doing what she did with that innocence.
It's interesting too, because when you think about when this movie came out, it came out after movies like Krull and The Dark Crystal and The Never-Ending Story. Krull's the one that kind of stands out for me because, you could almost see a Lizette Anthony take on that role. But I think the thing with what Mia Sara did with Lily is that there's a lot of different emotions and character aspects kind of at play with her character, right? She goes to touch the unicorn, which, Jack has told her, don't freaking touch the unicorn, right? That is forbidden, right? There's a big old, should be a big old sign that says don't touch, don't pet the animals here. But she goes anyways. Not that she actually necessarily touches it kind of thing, because, the unicorn gets spooked before she gets to that point. But, when she comes back and Jack's really pissed at her, she's like, I don't care. And then, of course, there's the whole, she teeters towards the darkness during the dance scene by the way, this film is almost, and I'm doing my math here, it is almost 40 years old. So if you haven't seen it by now, that's on you guys. So we're going to spoil the crap out of it. When she's doing the dance with this shadowy figure in the, by the big fireplace and all that, and she actually not necessarily succumbs, but becomes that creature as well.
Definitely becomes it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The two become one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the fact that, she, basically tries to gain Darkness's trust by saying that she wants to be the one to kill the unicorn and slit the throat. And it's you're not quite sure what's going to happen. There's a lot of nuance. And yes, there are times when you sit there and go, okay, maybe you could see it's a cinematic debut, but really, I mentioned that Tom Cruise would be great on stage with this. Mia Sara would have been.
Oh yeah, she would. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely a great 100%. Stage performance. Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about too. I was alluding to those scenes. That's where she became a bona fide star. She could have been a star. I don't know exactly why she sort of slipped away from the spotlight, but those scenes when she's dancing with the dark shadow, and it's so well shot as well, and she really hits it out of the park.
Now, that being said, she has pretty much retired from acting, and if I remember reading correctly, I think she actually co-runs a production company as well. So she's not necessarily, I don't think, completely out of the business, but I think she's out of the acting game, which is a shame because she is actually quite good in this. Want to move on to David Bennett, who played Gump. Now, it should be noted that apparently David Bennett's voice was overdubbed by Alice Playton because I guess his accent was a little too thick for the actual for the ADR. But how was Gump for you?
This is one of the keys to the film, though, in my opinion. He's fantastic. This guy is. There are parts when it could have gone so sideways because he's telling Tom Cruise, he's actually scolding him in some scenes. And it looks like a kid scolding, a much older guy, and you think, But this guy David Bennett managed to pull it off perfectly. And it goes that way the whole movie. So this guy is like the heartbeat of the film, really. And it's funny to say that because he's never run on to become anything too big, but this was quite a good role for him, in my opinion.
I think there was only one point where I'm just like, oh, okay, what are they doing with this guy? And it's when he challenges Jack to solve his riddle, or face death, by him playing the death song. And Jack guesses it that it's the blue bell. That's the answer to the riddle. And then he throws this, very over the top tantrum and, basically, lies down on the snow and like, okay, what is this? And then, but you're right. Like up to that point, there's this menace in his eyes. He doesn't look like he's supposed to be a menacing character, but there is a menace there. Like,
well, I think he is a menacing character. I think he's very unhappy with what Jack and Lily did. Very unhappy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because then of course he goes on to help Jack and try to solve, fix everything, and you see like the camaraderie and almost the leadership, because of course Jack does not know violence, and Gump's like, you're gonna learn. You're gonna freaking learn a little bit of violence here. And that's the other thing about Jack. You have Tom Cruise playing a character that doesn't know violence. It's brilliant.
Yeah, knows only good. Yeah, only good and only, kindness. And how do you fight a devil like darkness in that,
Yeah, like even the scene with Meg Mucklebones, the big tall, like we were talking about her earlier. The fact that he tries to, and this is actually something that's different from the U.S. theatrical version to the director's cut. In the U.S. theatrical version, he distracts her enough to, so he can just kind of, basically chop her head off with the sword. In the director's cut, he basically convinces her, Meg Mucklebones to basically admire herself in the shield. Basically tries to charm his way out of this and talk his way out of this. And when he realizes that, what, she's still going to try and eat me no matter what I do. So it actually, I think, develops Jack's character a little bit more.
I guess that's an interesting way Ridley Scott tried to further the development of that character for sure. I've never seen the one that you saw. I wish I had, actually, in retrospect going into this, but it may, it makes for an interesting conversation. Though, to see the differences, because I had never seen that scene, the tantrum scene you're talking about.
Because I think that scene is actually drawn out a little bit more in the director's cut as well, because Jack initially tries to lie to Gump about what happened and then tells him the truth. So Gump's even more pissed off at this point.
I don't remember any tantrum like that in the original one. I think that's all sort of director's cut added footage that he had on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, it's quite possible. It would be fascinating to watch these two films. I don't know whether you want to do it side by side or back to back kind of thing, because it's going to sound very differently because it's two different soundtracks entirely. But it would definitely be curious to run them back to back and see the differences.
Nothing else but to see a master director, a good director, and what he change the story and how did he change it. It would be interesting from almost a nerd point of view on film to see what's the director's cut versus the original. What is he trying to add in there story wise,
Yeah. And the fact that, a lot of the changes stemmed from initial test scores from test audiences. And that's one of the reasons why the score changed from the Jerry Goldsmith score to Tangerine Dream. It's like, all right, well, let's change this and, lighten the mood a little bit and make it a bit more adventurous. And if you listen to the Tangerine Dream score, it does have that more fantastical adventure kind of thing, where Jerry Goldsmith's score is much more epic and sweeping and fantastical. It is two different scores, but they're both great in their own right. And I guess, a lot of it will probably go down to your personal preference and what you prefer.
And the tone of the film that you're watching, which is it sounds like it's different in tone.
Oh yeah, well,
the two films.
I think Ridley Scott has gone on record and saying, like, this director's cut is kind of he wanted to make a dark fantasy. He wanted to make not everything be so spoon-fed good versus evil. He wanted nuance. He wanted subtleties. He wanted these characters to not be so black and white.
Interesting. And yet it's pretty A to B, though still good versus evil. There's nothing you can change about that. But I'd be interested to go back and see what he added in terms of nuances for sure. Yeah.
It's funny too, because apparently like he and the writer William Horston were going back and forth during the filming of Blade Runner about this script. Apparently like the original treatment is like would have worked out to be like a 2.5-3 hour film kind of thing, and they had to pull out a lot of, at least in the script, just a lot that was, I guess at the time, unfilmable. There's actually a quote from Neil Gaiman, who basically did a look back review of this film and said that, the script would have made a wonderful book. And I could very easily see that.
1,000-page, big, sprawling, world-building book would have been so awesome. I thought that at the time, and I think that now. I would love to get my hands on that.
All right, I'm going to put these two characters together here because they're kind of inseparable. Billy Barty as Screwball and Cork Hubbard as Brown Tom. Basically the two, I guess, trolls or whatever that were accompanying Gump. How were these guys, like basically the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the forest for you?
Oh, I love those guys. I mean, what more can you say? That's exactly what they are. They add some comic relief in this film as well, when this film is getting a little heavy-handed, if you will, or a little heavy period. And they were just so much fun to watch. Maybe I'm gushing over this film too much, but again, remember when I watched this and subsequently this really had a huge impression, and those guys made a huge impression on me personally.
Okay, I need to ask this because I could not get it out of my head while I was watching this. Billy Barty as Screwball, did it not look like he took the makeup that he wore in this film and basically brought it with him when he went to go do 1987's Masters of the Universe?
Yeah, I thought the same, yeah. I don't think they deviated very much, really. Hey, when it works, don't fix it,
Screwball and Gwildor, one and the same.
Pretty much, right? Like, seriously, too. They didn't put too much extra effort into that at all, yeah?
I just find it funny, but it is like I think you're right though. It does add a little bit of levity because, and again, remember I'm watching the director's cut on this, so it is a bit more of a dark fantasy than more of a fantasy adventure film that the theatrical release was. You at times need to take a breath and have a laugh. Right? You at times need to take your foot off the pedal because there are some heavy moments in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. I think back to the Dark Castle with the people being tortured by those big galoots with those hammers, and you can't always make fantasy where it's that dark and that brooding without having some levity. You're just going to fail, right?
Yeah. I think and that's you mentioned Star Wars at the beginning, and there are times when you could sit there and see some of the influence. I mean, even Star Wars is an original. It's all the hero's journey, right? But you could see how Screwball and Brown Tom are kind of the C-3PO and R2-D2, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And even C-3PO and R2-D2 were kind of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of a galaxy far, far away. So it does make sense. Annabelle Lanyon, who played Una, the fairy in this, I'm really curious on your take on this one here. How was Una for you?
Oh, it's a crazy character. It's a very layered character, in my opinion. It's first of all, she's got this innocence to her for most of the film until you get to the dungeons in the Dark Castle, and then she turns into Lily and is really pissed off that Jack isn't into her the way he's into Lily. And, there's nothing, it's a pretty scary moment there because she can pretty much drown them. She can just leave and that'd be the end of that. So she carried a pretty strong sort of presence throughout that whole film, and that was compounded in that scene. And I thought she was excellent personally, and again, I didn't think there was a bad performance in this, but I thought that performance in itself was excellent. That moment really showed that, look, you know, I'm not to be messed with.
I often wonder when you watch some of these roles and watch some of these characters evolve on the screen, and I often wonder if maybe subconsciously or maybe consciously they kind of were inspiration for future characters in different films. In this case, Una very much reminded me of what Julia Roberts did as Tinkerbell in Hook, in how, Tink really does love Peter. She does. But she knows that he can't really return that love to her. That's just not there. That's not that relationship. This is the same thing, right? Una loves Jack. Una will be anything that Jack wants, even if Una has to be Lily to get Jack's love.
That's pretty creepy, eh?
Yeah, right? Also, Wonder Woman, 1984. Oh, dear God. But anyways, that is another episode that I'm sure will happen somewhere down the road. But,
yeah.
But Una, you're right. Una, in that moment, when Jack says, no, it has to be Lily. I can't be with you as Lily because you're not Lily, right? There's that turn. And you don't know if she's going to, if it's going to turn sour, right? I love that there's a lot of, not everything is cut and dry with this. Not everything is black and white. These characters have depth. These characters have a lot to them. It's a minor role, but it adds something to the hero's journey in this, and you're not quite sure if the companion is going to be there with you at the end.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about these fellowship style fantasy films, if they're done right, though, right? It's the supporting characters that'll take Jack from A to Z and get him from the beginning to the end. And if those supporting characters suck, then you're going to lose interest in the film halfway through, right? And I thought, to their credit, that whole band was very, very entertaining.
Okay. We need to talk about Tim Curry as Darkness. Probably the most iconic imagery, or at least iconic looking characters of the entire decade of film. How was Tim Curry for you?
How is that, though? Someone has to explain this to me. So I am a nerd 10-year-old going to see this motion picture, and this character blew my mind. Like, literally, let's forget about this movie. I liked this movie a lot, whatever. This character is incredible. Tim Curry is amazing. And yet now it's revered as one of the great characters of the 80s. But when it came out, nobody gave a toss. I don't understand that. And at some point, I'd love to figure out why we start to revere things, 20, 30, 40 years later, because this was a role that should have been nominated for an Oscar, in my opinion. I know they were nominated for an Oscar for the makeup, but underneath that makeup is a, glowering, terrifying, angry, playful Lord of Darkness. And it's a performance that I think should have been up for an Oscar that year.
I think you nailed it, right? Yes, the makeup was, and rightfully so, acknowledged on many different levels. Despite the fact that apparently those horns were horrible on Tim Curry's neck, just because they're so not properly weighted. But there's such a, he's trying to convey this swagger as he's trying to convince Lily to be his. And anyone else, I think, in that makeup, like, sure, they'd look the part, and Darkness would still, be this iconic looking character, but not so much in the personality. That's the thing.
The eyes, eh?
Oh, I think it was, I think Michael Westmore is the guy's name who did a lot of the makeup for Star Trek. And if I remember correctly, Next Gen, that being, if I remember correctly, he said once in an interview, and I could be misremembering this, so please don't at me on this one if I'm wrong, but one of the key things when it came to Star Trek makeup, especially for Next Gen, was that if you can't see the eyes, then you can't see the personality. Mm-hmm. You saw the personality in darkness. You saw, the anger and the longing and the loneliness and there's so much to this. It's not just a big bad horny villain, right?
No.
Horny being, with the horns on his head, right? It's not just, discount demon. Darkness is a nuanced villain. I think more so than people really realize. And we've said it on the show a number of times. Any superhero film is weighted by how good the villain is. And I think you can say the same thing about a lot of fantasy films as well. If the villain is great, the rest of the film can suffer, and there's still something salvageable about the film because the villain really sets the tone. And I think there's where a lot of those fantasy films of the time falter in comparison to. Like, I'll admit, when Krull came out in theaters, and I know this is the second time I've mentioned Krull, but I watched Krull day in, day out, whenever I could, whenever it was on like First Choice or the Super Channel or whatever one it was on at the time, because, he had the glaive and it was this cool weapon and it was like basically like a throwing star for fantasy films. But then you go back and watch it now, right? And it's this, nowhere near Ridley Scott cinematography or set design or whatever the case may be. But the villain, it's just this like glob of makeup seemingly, and you don't really feel that connection, right? Here, darkness dances on the screen, right? Just even the way he would like lean up against the table when he's trying to get Lily to sit down in the chair, right? Tim Curry absolutely nailed this one.
Oh yeah. There's really a lot going on with that character. Yeah, you're right about that. The eyes, Tim Curry. I go back to if you've ever seen Clue.
Oh, I love Clue. I absolutely love Clue.
Honestly, I love that movie. I could have put that one. I don't think that was critically revered either. But if you watch that film, you see his eyes. He's got the eyebrows, those mischievous eyebrows a lot. And he's looking, hey, look, something's afoot here. And he brought that to Legend and Lord of Darkness character in spades, I thought, where at times he's being really coy and really mischievous. And, I think you're right. With somebody else in that role, this movie could have been just a cheap B film, but he just, and some of I know I rag on Ridley Scott once in a while, or I do rag on him once in a while because I think he's hit and miss. Like, I think sometimes he makes these beautiful films and sometimes he's a hack, but he had some shots in there of him with his cape blowing, and the full body makeup and everything that I think are on par with any fantasy film.
Mm-hmm. I will say, again, this is the difference between the version you've watched and the version I watched, is that in the director's cut, you don't actually see Darkness's face until like an hour in. I know in the theatrical cut, there's like the scene of him sitting in the chair and his nails are green and the eyes are green. That scene's,
at the beginning, right?
Yeah, that scene's not there at all, right?
Interesting. How do they start it?
So the soliloquy is there, right? And the talking is there as he's commanding Blix, but it's all done like over the shoulder. It's all done, with Blix's reaction to what he's saying as opposed to seeing Darkness actually talking. So it makes the reveal, right? So when Lily sees him, it's our first time seeing him.
Interesting.
Again,
I can see that working as well. Yeah.
Before we move on to Alice Playton, who played Blix, I have to ask. Okay, I was watching a video, one of the Watch Mojo ones, about top top Tim Curry performances. And of course, the top three were, as I remember correctly, Darkness, Pennywise, and Frankenfurter. So I'm going to put those three characters to you. If you're ranking those three characters, those three Tim Curry performances, Frankenfurter, Pennywise, and Darkness, how do you rank them?
Oh, that's interesting because they're completely different, but eerily the same. Um, I'd probably go with. Oh, it's really hard because I like the It character a lot, Pennywise. But I'd probably put. As much as I love Rocky Horror, I'd probably go with Darkness because I'm a sucker for that cool imagery, and when you can act on top of that, you know what? You get number one in my book.
It's almost like you take the menace of Pennywise and the swagger of Frankenfurter.
I was going to say that, but yeah.
Put it together, stick a couple horns on it, and all of a sudden you got Darkness.
That's exactly what it is. Exactly, yeah.
Okay, Alice Playton, who played Blix, the goblin minion of Darkness.
You must have loved this character. Although, again, you saw a different cut than I did, but you must have loved this character. This character is, your typical badass. No rules. I'm going to start a fire with my little wand here without thinking about the Prince of Darkness who might be watching. He's so subservient to the Prince of Darkness or whatever, and then he's so playing by his own rules the rest of the movie. I thought the contrast was fantastic.
What I think I like most about Blix is that it's not a bumbling minion, right? Blix isn't played for laughs. You've got Screwball and Brown Tom for that. Blix is there to mess up. But to that token as well, I like the fact that there's that one point where they've got the horn and they're sitting around the fire kind of thing, and Blix is openly pontificating, using the power for itself and basically overruling Darkness, and then all of a sudden and he's behind me. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's the thing.
Cool.
Yeah, but the thing is, Blix also encourages the minions that are there with it, and basically the discount Guar band, and they're all riled up Blix is going to be all powerful, and he's gone. They took him to go make him into pie. But yeah, Blix.
Yeah, there's a couple of really good shots by Ridley Scott in that when he's coming towards the unicorn to cut off the unicorn horn there through the snow in slow motion that are really cool shots.
So we have talked about the cinematography, and of course this film did win at the British Cinematography Awards that year. What is it about this film that stands out as far as what Ridley Scott brought to this?
Well, Ridley Scott apparently has always been a guy who wants perfection, and you can see in a lot of these shots, especially not just the castle, but the countryside where Lily goes to meet, I can't remember her name, in that little cottage. She's eventually, I think, frozen to death at some point.
Oh, Nell, as played by Tina Martin.
Right, that's it. That cottage always got my fancy. That is really well shot, that whole scene, with intricate details that, you could be on set and you could say, you know what, don't worry about that rolling pin or whatever. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. But when you put it in, Ridley Scott has created a world outside of just, the castle and the stream where you see Jack and Lily at the beginning. He's created instead of just point A to B, he's created the in-between as well. And I think he probably had to fight really hard to get that vision across at some points. He probably had to convince his cinematographer at points look, this is what we need. And he probably had to convince the studio, look, I need extra money to do this. But those little details, I think, I'm not going to name Blade Runner because Blade Runner to me is perfect. You don't touch that movie. It's perfect. But there's a lot that he probably brought with him from Alien and Blade Runner and movies. And even there's one before that too, the Duelists. I'm sure he brought all his experiences there and shot this film to create a world, knowing full well that he'd be compared to, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien works and stuff like that, but never once backing down on his vision. And I respect him for that big time, because that had a profound effect on me as a younger man, and it probably still does today. I'd have to rewatch it again, but having watched it 50 times in my life at least, that had a profound effect. The world building in that, while not epic in scope, is beautifully done.
We have to talk about the music. We do. Because
Yeah.
this was, in comparison, like we've talked about some minor differences and a couple of scenes that were in different versions and, not in the other kind of thing. The biggest glaring difference between the theatrical release as far as domestically and the director's cut is the score. The original theatrical US release is the Tangerine Dream, right? That very German electronic sound. And, there are parts where it really works. I will admit there are parts where Tangerine Dream nailed it. But I think overall, it needed a more sweeping orchestra. And when you listen to the Jerry Goldsmith score, and the fact that there were songs with lyrics written for this movie that were used in the actual, like, I get there's the John Anderson, I can't remember the name of the song right now.
Is Your Love Strong Enough?
No, that was the Brian Ferry one.
Oh, that's Brian Ferry. Yes.
Yeah, with David Gilmour from Pink Floyd on guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the sun always loves you or something like that.
Yes, I should know that, because that's one of my favorite parts of the film.
I can't remember. Anyway, that whole scene is like, that whole music cut is gone from the director's cut. So in all that we've talked about, and I know you haven't seen the director's cut, but in all that we've talked about, how was the Tangerine Dream score for you?
It's as important as any element in that film. And I've heard the Jerry Goldsmith theme. I listened to it on YouTube, and it's wonderful. It's beyond adequate. It could have been used easily, but remember, I in the theater, I saw this cut with Tangerine Dream, and subsequently saw it 50 more times in the next 10 years or whatever. I think it's akin to removing Vangelis from Blade Runner, personally, and putting in a sweeping score. No, thank you.
I'm really glad you brought up Vangelis and Blade Runner. With Blade Runner, I completely agree. The Vangelis score is perfection for that, absolute perfection. But that fits more of the style, right? When you take a look at Legend, I went and I looked at scenes with the Tangerine Dream score in it, and it just didn't mesh with me. And maybe it's because it's a fantasy film, and I loved that it had this sweeping orchestral score with a lot of there's a lot layered into that score. And honestly, I have not seen the US theatrical version. I have not watched all of the Tangerine Dream score in context. But one of the biggest differences, aside from the ending, we'll talk about the ending in a second here, is the scene where this black clad figure starts dancing with Lily in order to try to turn her to the dark side before darkness tries to win her over. The Tangerine Dream score, it's okay, but the Jerry Goldsmith score for that, the music starts light and very, not waltzy, but definitely very fantastical. But as the dance gets more and more closer to Lily turning to the darkness, it becomes a much more menacing dance, and I think there's a bit more character to that song.
Yeah, I think he had two opportunities. I know what you're talking about, and it's a good piece. I think there's very few instances where Ridley Scott looked in the editing bay and said, "This is a huge, sprawling scene that I need a big orchestra to work with, and I think the ending would have been one, which is why they removed. Would they remove the Brian Ferry? You have to remind me.
I can't. I'm pretty sure they removed the Brian Ferry unless they left it in the credits. I'll admit, once the credits started, I was out. So
Yeah, fair. No, that's fair. I think from the point where he, sort of things are happening, he's broken the ice to go get the ring, and it becomes a sweeping scene. At that point, I think the Jerry Goldsmith would work perfectly. And I also think what you're talking about in the with Dancing with the Shadow Figure works perfectly, because those are, as you said, sweeping scenes. They're power. They're, the armies fighting in Lord of the Rings. There's real power in that. While the rest of it is in my opinion mostly uh, sort of one-on-one, smaller in scope, if you will. And I think that's why Tangerine Dream worked for me so well, because it resonated. The sound, the Tangerine Dream wrote this score that really reverberates through the smaller scenes, no matter what instrument they appear to be using. And I think that's my only complaint. I mean, they could have incorporated both, and it would have been out of this world. But you take one completely away, unfortunately, and you're left with just the one experience or the other.
I would love, because we are coming up on the 40th anniversary of this movie, I would love for them to release some definitive collector set with the different versions, like all of them. Like there was the US theatrical release, there was the European theatrical release, and then there was the director's cut. I would love a box set with all of them in, so you could sit and you could watch and you could compare. And like I think with the director's cut, Ridley Scott's finally got what he wanted. But it would be curious. Too. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because Tom Cruise has come out and said the director's cut is the one to watch.
Oh, Cruise hated the other cut. I know he did. I'm embarrassed too when I read those comments, because it's like, okay, because I'm really supporting that cut of it, and you really didn't like it, did you?
Well, I mean, Cruise didn't. I still haven't watched it yet, but I would definitely.
No, Cruise. Yeah, not you. I meant Cruise in this in this instance. You can have your opinion on it when you see it. I think you might enjoy it as well, but Cruise didn't. That's for sure.
The other thing too that's really different, aside from the music, is the ending. So in the U.S. theatrical release, Jack wakes up Lily, shows that he went and got the ring, and the two of them run off together into the forest to be happily married, because of course she throws this ring into the pond and said, whoever gets that ring, I'm going to marry. And it's like,
yeah. Thanks for that, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. You couldn't have just tossed it, at the edge of the water, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But in the theatrical cut, or sorry, in the director's version, Lily wakes up, doesn't believe when Jack says it was all a dream and everything's okay. And she tells him that she loves him, but cannot take him away from the forest. That's where he belongs. They love each other, but they're not going to run off together to be married. It's almost like a platonic love.
Where are you running off to, though? I didn't see your version, but where are they running off to?
Well, that is the question, right? Like
the big city.
We're running off to Vegas. We're going to elope.
That's it. We're in a shotgun wedding here, yeah.
But I ask you, and I recognize you haven't seen the director's cut, but hearing the difference between those two endings, where Lily and Jack run off to be together, or the ending where Lily and Jack love each other, but they're going to love each other on their own terms and not try to change each other, but still be, together in spirit as opposed to in person. Which ending do you think you would appreciate more?
It's a tough question. I guess it depends on the flow of the film, the flow of the director's cut. This is a fairy tale, though, and it really is in every aspect. It's got the wicked villain. It's got the, wide-eyed hero and the innocent girl who gets, taken by the bad guy. It's a fairy tale from start to finish. So I don't think you need to go and really mess with that ending and talk about, let's just be friends for now. I think you it just ended the way he ended it the first time. They're going to be together. They fought pretty hard. He dove after that ring and could have broken his neck for the love of beans. I think it's fine if they go and be together at that point.
Okay, before we get to our MVPs of this film, the internet has spoken with a few comments here. Actually, there's a few comments on this one here. The What's Streaming podcast just chimed in with love this movie. Also, the Sleevy G podcast chimed in with I still to this day think Tim Curry played the devil in this movie. Probably not wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's close, yeah.
Yeah. Dan Allard chimed in with Tim Curry's iconic makeup and performance were beyond brilliant. Adil Lakhani has chimed in with Legend is a throwback I definitely need to revisit. I still have some flash memories of seeing it as a kid, but don't remember too well. Do go watch it, but now you have to decide which version you're going to go watch.
Oh, both. Why not?
Exactly. Right? Take it all in.
Why not? Yeah,
the Doom Generation podcast chimed in with, we love it. It was one of our earliest episodes. Tim Curry can even make a demon sexy. Hells yes. And PJU2 over on Twitter has chimed in with, I thought Tim Curry and Mia Sara were amazing. I thought the story was cute. Could it have been better? Yes, but it was fun. I liked the score too. Also, some of the makeup and costumes were great. The character of Gump was cool too. So basically across the board, people have, professed a real, a love of this film, whether it's the makeup and the design, Tim Curry, Mia Sara, there's a lot to love in this film, but it's time to narrow it down to one. Okay. So Peter, I'm going to ask you here, who is your MVP of Legend?
Well, it would come down to two choices. You'd have to remind me who did the set design for it, because the set design is wonderful. So either the set design, I guess three choices, the makeup or Tim Curry. I think I'd go with Tim Curry, because when I think of Legend, the first thing I think of is him with his makeup and his eyes, his glowing eyes, and his hooves, for gosh sake, and his horns. I think he's the MVP, and quite easily.
Tim Curry was definitely on my short list for MVP, and it's freaking Tim Curry, so he's probably going to be on my short list for any movie he's probably in. Mia Sara was also shortlisted for me. The fact that this is her cinematic debut, and she pulls off that performance, kudos to her. I wish she was, still acting these days. But my MVP is Ridley Scott behind the camera. This film is epic, from the cinematography to the set design to even the nuance to some of these characters, right? They could have been two-dimensional, but they're not. There's a lot to these characters. And when I got to go back to Krull here, probably because I watched it recently. But when you take a look at some of those fantasy movies of the time, not all of them hold up well. Krull definitely does not look that good when you're watching it in 2023. And I loved that film as a kid. There are some of these films where you just look at it and go, oh, that is some really nasty green screen.
Yeah, exactly. That's the difference too.
Yeah.
It must be. This
film, because it's physical sets, because it's physical makeup, because they didn't try to CGI in too much, or at least VFX at the point, right? Because of course it's not computer graphics at this point. It's probably all that Apple money he got from doing that commercial there, the 1984 commercial. But this film should be almost a case study in how practical effects and sets will stand the test of time better than any green screen, better than any CGI, really better than anything that's not really there. We've come a long way in how we do these virtual sets and this, 360 sight curtain that they're shooting, Marvel and Star Wars movies in now. We have come a long way from some of these films. This film alone shows that when you have a practical set, practical effects, real makeup, real people in that makeup. No matter what, you can look back at it almost 40 years later, and it stands the test of time.
Yeah.
Peter,
nice intimacy to it, eh?
Peter, thank you so much for chiming in on this show. Now, before we go, I want to give you the microphone here. I want to give you the floor. Please let us know about movies and stuff, where we can find it, and how we can find you on the internet and in person.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you want to drop by, I'm at 1787 Kilbourne. It's a little store packed with, 15,000 movies, 12,000 for rent, and many others for sale. And I love movies. I really do. And I always have, and I always will. So I'll always be there. And if you want to check us out at moviesandstuff.com, and you should be able to scroll through. I think we have 1,000 criterions, which I'm very proud of at this point. I really love, diving into the world of foreign film if I can. So you can check out a lot of those. And yeah, I just appreciate, this was really fun, actually. This was a really fun time. And if you want to drop me a line, you can do that at moviesandstuff613@gmail.com, or come and see me. Yeah.
Peter, this has been so much fun. You have an open invitation on this show anytime you want to join back in. O-Town represent. I'm so happy to have you on the show. And to you, our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of It's Not That Bad. Now, you guys know the drill. If there is a movie out there that you think is unfairly maligned, or you think is so bad that there's no way in hell that we can find anything good to say about it, hit us up on Twitter at NotThatBadCast, over on Facebook at facebook.com/NotThatBadCast, or go over to our website at notthatbadcast.com. There you can actually chime in on some of the upcoming films that we do have coming up. So we want to hear more from you guys because that makes it so much more fun. Until next time, I'm Jay. He's Peter. You guys are awesome. This is It's Not That Bad. Take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, Skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.